We have two gentlemen here who are going to speak about their experience as facilitators and practitioners. And you would have to be pretty maybe living with your head in the sand to not know that psychedelics are having a moment right now. They're everywhere. There's so much discussion about, and very hopeful discussion about the possibilities around how to use these medicines to address different kinds of mental health issues. And there's all kinds of experiments happening everywhere and all kinds of practitioners and people taking psychedelics. So we thought we'd start out by just asking our friends here, Ross and Dimitri, to give us a little bit of an overview of how they see the current situation with psychedelics and then how they see themselves within that. And from there, we're going to go on a little bit of a journey around their backgrounds, how they got into it themselves, and how they see the process of working with these medicines unfold for people they work with. So hopefully it'll be an opportunity for you all to think with us in your lives, whether if you were moving through this process, what that might look like, and what questions at the end.
Yes, and we want to leave a little extra time for questions because this is such a broad subject and something that these two do a little bit different than you might have heard or tried before. So definitely great questions.
So Ross and Dimitri, who wants to start? A little bit about how you got into this. Well, maybe first an overview of how you see the landscape, and then how you yourselves got into it and how you fit into it. If indeed fitting into it is not.
Well, the landscape right now, as far as in the area of kind of mental health, which is where with this new psychedelic renaissance, there's a big part of that that's sort of new to psychedelics on some level, is how you sort of treat mental illness. Is really kind of a scary landscape in some ways, because it's this new way in which people are constantly being told that they're really sick in the head, that something's wrong with them and they're diseased. And so the promise in psychedelics is actually to kind of remove us from that model of thinking about psychological suffering. And for me, at least, back to what psychotherapy was originally about, which is about problems of living. How do I make a life work in a way that works for me? But psychedelics, the kind of landscape right now is psychedelics are actually entering into that process. The sales pitch is this is a cure for depression, a cure for anxiety, a cure for trauma. And it's in doing that, it's doing what's called normalization. It's saying, you're sick, and you need to do this practice to get unsick. And until you're at that point, something's really seriously wrong with you. And so there's something very unpsychedelic to psychedelics right now, as far as in the landscape.
I totally disagree. No, we agree. There's tremendous promise. There's tremendous potential. But introducing it in a structure that is perhaps broken, to be generous, and perhaps deliberately oppressive, I think is problematic. So you'll hear soon about our own journeys with psychedelics and why we do it, why we choose this as part of our life path. But just to echo Ross's concerns, or maybe build on them a bit, because I have some other ones. We're seeing the push is to place this within systems that are broken already. And by simply placing these substances within those systems, that we'll see a change in the systems and see a change for the individual. And I love the Krishnamurti quote, to be well adjusted to a sick society is no sign of health. And this is, so the concern is that this becomes a sort of a salma, another way to sort of anesthetize ourselves. And sometimes we need anesthetizing. And maybe even used as another tool of social control. And the potential is the opposite. And I am, as pessimistic as all that sounded, I'm an optimist. So,
Dimitri and I often say that we want to keep something secret from all these people that are claiming psychedelics are miracles. And the secret is they're kind of miraculous. right? But it's becoming this thing, this sort of quick fix, and not just in mental health, but in spiritual practices. And in people, in this way in which people feel like, I'm not full enough until I've had this moment of awakening. And awakening and these spiritual events become these things that kind of make them feel insecure about themselves. And so then it's sort of this driving force in our society again about sort of fixing yourself and getting to that place. It's a little bit what happened with mindfulness, right? Where it became this thing that if you're not mindful, something's wrong with you, right? And that's all part of this kind of capitalist way in which you're constantly trying to kind of buy something to fix yourself or fix your experience. You know?
So, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey to this, and presumably you came in through that model, or you experienced some of that on your own journey in. And so maybe tell us about what that was like. What were you coming from, and how did you discover this?
So there's a concept, for those of you that don't know, or a terminology, plant teachers. And my first two plant teachers were coca and poppy, so cocaine and heroin. I mean that I did learn a lot, but my relationship with those two plants in the form of cocaine and heroin became problematic. What started out as, I believe, well, like most drug use and misuse, it's two things: enjoyment, an anesthetizing, and also an expansion. I believe as a young person in Detroit, where drugs and heroin were sort of all over the place, that part of that was expansion. And what happened to me over the course of a 20-year IV drug habit was my life became very small. I was living in New York for many years as an artist and activist, and had to go back, and I found myself approaching 40, living in my parents' basement. And sort of with a lot of death around me, including the death of my pregnant common-law wife, and really wanting to die every day. My first thought in the morning, my last thought at night. And I had heard about something called Iboga or Ibogaine. And Iboga is from Central Africa, from Gabon, originally used originally and continually used for millennia as a initiatory medicine. It's a root bark, very high threshold in terms of how long it lasts and some of the dangers associated with it, and very tricky substance. But one of the most interesting things is about it, for at least someone like myself, interesting thing I should say, is that it interrupts physical dependency on opioids with ameliorating or no withdrawal. And I had known about that sort of through activist circles on the Lower East Side and artist circles. But at turning 40, I decided to go try it. I'm Greek American, and I just wanted to go back home to Greece one time and then die. And so I went to Holland. And I had this experience with Iboga that lasted 3 days. I was on cocaine, heroin, and methadone. It lasted 3 days. It was not easy. But I was outside of Amsterdam, and especially back then, it was sort of a mecca for junkies, you know, like Amsterdam was the shining city on the hill for me. I had no desire to use, and I haven't used since. And from there, I went to Greece. I stayed for 3 months. I found out a lot about myself. In that time, I saw where I came from and who I was, sort of ancestrally. And then I sort of threw myself into the work of bringing this to folks and doing it illegally for a number of years, for well over a decade. Eventually, that career ended with a DA busting down the door and with no sense of irony, arresting myself for detoxing and a few others for detoxing an active drug user. So, but I'll just say this about that. And then I've worked with other medicines. I've worked with thousands of people. I've worked with MDMA and psilocybin, and eventually led me to Gabon. And I saw something in Gabon, which I can talk about later, which is more about what you all were talking about yesterday, space. But I'll wrap it up because it's a long story. And I've been working with it for 20 years. With not Iboga so much anymore, but psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, and other medicines, other drugs. I let the individual decide whether it's a medicine. But the reason I stepped away from working with Iboga was because I was trying to replicate what had happened with me with everyone. And and of course that's a natural desire, but by trying to sort of bring that to the world, I was also producing harm, creating harm, because that was not the result of everyone that sort of came through the space, that came to me. There were all kinds of other results that we could point to as maybe successful. But this idea of cessation of drugs, clearly drug use, problematic, dangerous, deadly drug use, clearly that is a goal, but it's not the only goal. And so what I started to see were people coming to me, I became sort of a poster boy. This is before YouTube and stuff like that, but like they would hear about my story somehow, and they would come to me and something else would happen. Maybe they'd call their parents. Maybe they would change their relationship to the drug. Maybe they'd go back and do drugs the same way they did before, but in some way there was a shift that didn't relate to that. And I think that shift really is about being able to having the honor to spend those 3 or 4 days with these folks and honoring them and loving them, much like I saw when I went to Gabon. But what was happening when that didn't happen, somehow they were extra broken, and I think, and extra damaged and unfixable. So I think that's the danger of the current narrative. That was long.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you. Yeah.
Ross?
I have a real suburban version of this, which is just, I was one of those people over 50 who read the Pollen book, and I'd taken mushrooms back in college, and there was this sort of idea in that book about how when you're over 50, this might be the best medication for you to wake you up again. And that's how I found Dimitri, and so I did a ceremony with Dimitri, and it brought me back to a lot of an ethos that I'd kind of lost, this concern of this kind of emptiness in our culture. What we used to call alienation, this sense that we have no sense of power or control over our lives, that we're sort of, everything's commodified, the dangers of that, the dangers of conformity, the worry about people losing the idea that imagination is valuable, that curiosity is valuable. And so it woke me up to these things that actually he and I share in our youth, was a time in our culture where those things were actually talked about and thought about. And it got me interested in if this is sort of a medicine for some of the things that we used to talk about. What we used to talk about as sort of Marxist humanism or humanism and things like that. And so that's what sort of brought me into this a little bit. Yeah.
Well, this is a good segue into, you do work with people with the medicine now, and you have a particular approach, and you do see there's a lot of positive and a lot of promise in these medicines and the kind of way that you work with people, and there's a particular thing that you look for around play, around space, around opening up. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the process is? Like, say someone here wanted to work with you. Mm-hmm. They wanted to, go and do some ceremonies with you or whatever you describe it as, some journeys. What does that look like? What's the first thing you do with them? What are the kinds of questions you ask? How does that intake process, what does it look like?
Yeah, so I think it's, Dimitri and I share an injury. And that injury is that we have some, what could be called treatment trauma. Both of us diagnosed at a very young age as having learning disabilities. And both of us recognizing that that diagnosis was actually more traumatic than any disability. And so I think we're highly sensitive to the naming of suffering in a way where there's an expert in the room that decides your fate, right? We think that that's actually iatrogenic. In other words, doctor created, creates more problems than it does solve anything. And so all our processes are about how do we create a real space for the person to kind of investigate what they're looking for without us kind of getting in there and telling them that this is the meaning of what you're doing. So we do this thing called a dialogic practice where we have these kind of conversations with the person where we're only reflecting what's going on with us.
This is before they do any kind of journey, just
Yeah.
to help them get clear about why they're doing
Yeah.
it or prepare them for it.
Yeah, so that replaces what people might call intention setting.
Right.
Like we're a little less interested in the person saying, I'm going to go in there and take mushrooms and work on my self-compassion than we are on something a little more nuanced, a little more playful, a little more flexible. And that also is how we think about what people call integration. I don't know if we really want people to be integrated when they come out. We want them to be more playful and open and to experience. But how can we also kind of hold that through it? And then Dimitri can talk about the ceremonies, because the ceremonies are also kind of unique in that way. You know?
Yeah. So what I'd like to just sort of frame it very simply, we're not medicalized, but we're medically supported. This is not sort of shamanism, but we're honoring the traditions of many of the people, the wisdom that we receive. What we are is something in the middle that, as old-fashioned as it might sound, is what we might call modern. This idea that our ancestors, our cultural and spiritual ancestors, are John Coltrane and Walt Whitman and Billie Holiday and Bootsy Collins and those artistic ancestors, and what they held was a sort of boldness of the creative, right? And it doesn't have to be capital A artist. Could be the small a beautiful small creative spirit inside of each of us, and the idea around improvisation. So when we say ceremony, I'm not bringing in a particular cultural, hopefully certainly not a religious or spiritual angle, although I may be carrying around my sky god in my head and my heart. I'm not going to sort of impose it on someone. And if people aren't comfortable with the word ceremony, session's fine. But I call it ceremony because we're setting it aside. And we use vibrational instruments, sound. A sound bath is sort of underplaying it. It's like 4 to 6, when we're working with mushrooms, 4 to 6 hours of live continual sound, working with other artists and space holders, and sort of an attunement to either the group or the individual. I think what's great about psychedelics is how inefficient they are. How much it takes to really hold space. So we use this word, holding space, and that's the feeling you get when you're in it with a really good therapist. It's the feeling you get when you're being parented by a stranger, or maybe an actual parent, if some of us are lucky enough to have that experience. And so the container is we call it the container. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. I'll say a couple things about that. When I went to Gabon to sort of explore and then be initiated, and I went back several times over the course of years, the first thing I noticed was this reminded me of something. And what reminded me of was the house music scene. I mean, clearly there's a connection between, sort of a direct connection, Atlantic connection between the musics. But there was this community, there was drugs, and there was a commitment to sort of moving someone over the line. Last night, the DJ saved my life. Now, I'm reducing an incredibly complex spiritual and religious practice and I don't mean to do that or dishonor that, but that idea of community, that idea of space holding, and what they did is they held those people, the person going through it, the village would hold an individual or 3 or 4 people as they sort of came over. So that means an attentiveness to what was happening. So what's really important in that inefficient thing that I'm talking about, it's inefficient because we also don't know what's going to happen. But it's really about an attitude of holding through the improvisation of song. In Gabon, the healing arts and the performing arts are so close, and I have a history in the performing arts. And it's not a performance. It is, in fact, maybe a meditation, perhaps a prayer if you're willing. But this holding, which was the most important thing. And so I believe that the drugs, the medicine, can create a space between, let's say, you and a pain, you and rumination or anxiety or grief, but also you and joy, you and love. And some distance can be created with the medicines. And then the idea of space holding is to extend that space. One of our ancestors is Sun Ra, and he said space is the place. And so the idea of creating more space around that rumination, around that childhood injury, around the thing you said last week that you wish you hadn't have said it. Maybe in that space there can be some compassion. Maybe in that space there can be some perspective, and through perspective, what we call healing. And I love what you all were saying about space yesterday, and also about this is psychedelics, but it's not unique to psychedelics. It's the medicine is really what you all are coming into this room with. When you, for the most part, do what is right on a constant, and do what is loving, and do what is just, and do what is gentle. And so it's just maybe a reconnection with that. And I think it's just within us, and it could be with medicine. I happen to really like drugs, but it could be with drugs or without, you know.
I think there's an opportunity here just for anybody that's sort of naive to this process to say that there's this idea of set and setting, right? That it's a whole other story when you take psychedelics and somebody's holding you through that ritual than taking psychedelics on your own. And so set is what you come with, but the setting is, you know, Timothy Leary thought it was actually the most important thing happening. Mm-hmm. And we believe that. We believe this is a human event with a plant in the room, but it's a human event. It's a human event of holding somebody through an event. Mm-hmm. And for me as a psychotherapist, I have a lot of affinity to that because psychotherapy, before it became the treatment for illness, was all about this improvisational art form. Someone walks in and it's a 50-minute improv where one person is compassionately helping somebody in pain. And that is really what space holding is too. There's a strong amount of alliance between what original psychotherapy was and what space holding is. They're really kind of the same thing in a way.
So are you in conversation during the actual ceremony itself or during the journey with people? Are you talking to them? Are you drawing them out? Are they flat on their back and just they got primed early on with that process, that intake with you, or they're more open, but they're having their kind of private experience? What does it look like?
We don't do, I mean, we have a component within the ketamine space that we have. And ketamine is a much quicker acting medicine. Right. We have a psychotherapeutic component. And that's more of that. What I do is, trained as a ceremonialist, is allow someone to have a relationship with the sound, be very attuned to what's happening, you know, listening, looking, feeling, and tuning, and create it. The idea is you put on a mask where maybe it's dark already, and you lay down in a comfortable place, and the medicines start to come on. We might do some breath work, and then an interaction with the sounds, with the vibrational instruments to begin with, and then eventually going into more melodic instruments, flutes, string instruments, and just that relationship with self, the sound sort of deepening it. Also some, I believe, prayer deepening it on our part, but nothing too obvious or too interfering. Now, of course, that's the template. The template is you put the mask on, you go inside. But if someone needs to take that mask off, needs to talk, needs to rage, needs to cry or laugh or dance or sing or weep, then that's fine. We follow them. We might encourage them to come back to the template. But if that's not happening, it's not happening. The only time we get prescriptive is if someone veers away from the ethos of self-love or self-acceptance. If there's some sort of beating oneself up or fear or panic, that's when we'll come in and tell them, maybe reflect the truth about themselves, that they are a spirit of God. And so what we try not to do in that space, I try not to be formulaic when someone is talking, and allow someone to have their experience. And that's a practice. In other words, to not say, well, this is happening with that, which happens in a lot of medical settings. It also happens in a lot of spiritual settings. And I think that is sort of, unless someone needs it to sort of hold on and be comforted by a formulaic response. But I think what we're doing there is we're interfering with that direct connection to spirit. And sort of, the job is to try not satisfy yourself.
I'm curious, you're talking a lot about community. You talked about the Detroit music scene and kind of holding. Last night a DJ saved my life, and and you work a lot with kind of bringing mental health out into the community or treating people where they are in their communities. And it reminded me of a question that somebody asked yesterday, which was, what if you don't want to be, what if you don't feel comfortable being in community with people? I think the question specifically was, do I have to go and meditate with a bunch of people if that doesn't feel good to me? So I'm wondering, what is the difference that you see, or, how does this feel different, or the outcomes are different for, let's say, someone doing this at home alone, or just in dialogue with you, or in, like a traditional ayahuasca ceremony, which might be a lot of people in a sweat lodge?
Mm-hmm. I think doing it at home alone is wonderful. I think recreational use can be, look, most of the things we learned about this didn't come from Johns Hopkins or from the Amazon. Yeah. It came from recreational use, where someone was like, I kind of feel better about this or that. So I would just caution like a harm reduction approach. Just make sure you're safe, make sure that the phone's off and all that kind of stuff. But I don't see that as being the wrong way. There is a difference in what we do. I heard someone really simply say it's the difference between eating at home and going out to dinner, right? It's going out to a really nice restaurant, I hope. Both are nourishing, but they're in a different experience. So I don't want to sort of set up like this is only a professional setting, but it is much different. Outcomes, I try not to hit on outcomes, but the experience is different. I think the experience of just being, look, it's beautiful to be dancing with your friends. That's a gorgeous thing. It's beautiful to be maybe sitting at home and listening to your favorite records. That's a beautiful thing. But the experience of being honored, the time being taken to honor you as a sacred individual, I think there's something about that maybe doesn't sort of get directly. I think maybe that's a different
feeling of being
feeling.
seen.
Yeah, it's being seen.
And so what happens when this piece around play that you guys are both so into, and when you see that taking hold, what does that look like? When you see that the spirit of that in the room, what does that look like?
Maybe not in the room, but maybe afterwards too, right?
Some more afterwards.
So there's a lot of talk right now about what they call brain plasticity, which is the idea that your brain becomes awake again like a child in a way, right? Where it becomes more flexible, ready to learn, open. And that's a real cognitive term for something that's much more of an experience of openness, right? And an experience of the world being flexible and having opportunity and possibility in it. And our name for that experience is play. When a child is playing with their toy, they're seeing something concrete and they're making it into something clay-like, right? So that very act is plastic in the way that they're using that term. And then what's happening is that they're feeling that piece of clay or that toy has life in it. So they're seeing that thing as alive. That's really the central element of playing with toys. And then they're feeling alive. And then they're also feeling some sense of a life between them and the toy. And I just named what is sort of the basic element of what it's like to have a psychedelic experience. So on some level, that's what in my mind, we're bringing people back to, is what's it like to be in a state of play. And our hope is, at least my hope is that they walk away back in a playful state. I'm less interested in being in a plastic state. AI is plastic. AI keeps learning. I'm interested in curiosity, imagination. The ability to hope is a playful event, because hope is about every time I see a barrier, I can figure a way around it. All of those things emerge from play. Those are not the things people are talking about when they talk about mental health.
Yeah, it's so true.
Right? They're talking about these brokenness, depression, anxiety, PTSD, these sort of broken commodities or broken things that we have to get people fixed on so they can go back to work, instead of how do we get people to these other elements.
Like something that you were saying when we were talking earlier is that, we talk about the brokenness of depression or anxiety, but you see as much more fundamental kind of brokenness to not have creativity. Like we should be putting more.
My God, we should be talking about imagination disability.
Yeah.
Right? Curiosity disability. These are such profound, extremely human elements that are being suppressed in our society that are, in my mind, much more important than whether I can pay attention or not.
Yeah, it's very radical what you're talking about. You're talking about a solution, not to go diagnosis by diagnosis and find the exact right solution for each one, but rather that there is there's a larger problem, which is the loss of a sense of possibility or play or openness. And actually, I see this a lot in the meditation world. I see a lot of people who come feel very trapped in their life, or very they're in a prescribed thing. There's some story they have about how they are that is really limiting them, and it's causing all kinds of suffering. And they can get into a practice, sometimes meditation, sometimes it's through psychedelics, it could be through many different things, and the sense of suddenly coming out from that, the sense of suddenly feeling like you have your life back, like there's more possibility, that is what you're talking about. That movement into a space of more play, more openness, more reciprocity.
Right, and so the language of anti-play on some level is, in a lot of ways, it's entered the psychedelic community. But one of the, this term, integration. I'm personally not interested in being an integrated person. I'm interested in being unintegrated. I'm interested in being open to the next experience, right? But then people worry, I didn't integrate my trip, right? That didn't happen, right? Or how do I get to that point of integration?
What do you think people mean when they say that?
I think sometimes they mean, did I integrate what happened on the trip into some sort of meaning structure that I can carry on, which I think I have some problems with, or this sense that I've become more integrated through it. But I don't personally know what integration means as a person. I mean, I don't know what that element is that we're trying to get to.
It's almost like taking an ineffable experience and wrapping it in concepts so that you can take it put it in your pocket and take it with you.
Yeah, we like the term, it's like ineffable, noetic, which means a truth that's truthier than worded experience, right? And we like to keep things at that level,
Just to push back slightly around the integration thing, I agree with the term is kind of annoying, but I guess the way I see it is that, we live these lives and there's all these parts of us that we don't really, they're kind of unconscious, that are often running the show, and we don't even realize that's happening. And there's a process through practice, whatever your practice is, of getting more aware of those parts, those programs, whatever you want to call it. Like they get, quote, integrated in this larger awareness, the capacity to be present and to see those things. They're no longer unconsciously running the show. They're kind of part of the team. So that when I hear integration, that's kind of what I think, and I do think that is a general direction I personally would like to go in.
Yeah.
So how does that fit with the critique or with what happens with the medicine?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good thing, but I don't think it's the result we're looking for.
Right.
To be more integrated is probably
the way
you're describing it.
Now I'm finally integrated.
Boom!
I can just sit here.
I can go back to work.
Sit here and never move again.
Yeah.
You're talking about the result you want is a more dynamic, active, expressive, interacting with the world, alive,
curious. Like for us, curiosity is a big deal.
Right. Okay, I understand.
Like, this person in front of me, I'm actually curious about. We don't live in a world where that happens. Like look at this remarkable being in front of me. I could spend hours learning about their unique being. That is sort of lost in our society. That's more interesting to me than did I get integrated. De-automization
was how Deichmann, a famous psychologist, talked about this process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Something else that you guys talked about when we were shooting it before is, that people will approach psychedelics kind of as like every plant has their, the kind of guide, so maybe it's ayahuasca as the green mother or whatever. And then after these experiences, it's kind of like you attribute what has happened to you to that, that drug, that medicine, that being. And so it's kind of like there's not a sense of taking ownership of something of having happened for yourself that you can replicate again, but it's almost like a dependency. Like I need that from the mother, or the mother changed me, or
the drug did it for me.
The drug did it for me. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that. I think it's something that we run up against a lot with people, especially people who do ceremony often, again and again.
I'll take it.
You're next.
Yeah, I'm next. Okay. With respect to tradition, and in respecting that, a critique. I see the value in fetishization. I'm an initiated fetish priest in 2 spiritual traditions. I see the limitation of it, and I also see the destructive aspect of it as well. I think it's very valuable to have an ally. When people speak in terms of a parent or a grandparent when they refer to these drugs or medicines, people will be upset that I say drugs. I'll say medicines out of respect. I get that. We want to be held by our mother. We want a good grandfather. I understand that, and it's valuable. But when it becomes disempowering is when it's a reliance. I guess this may be a good way to look at it. You don't want to be reliant on your mother. It's a bad relationship if you become dependent on that relationship. And the fetishization can lead to that, where you can't. A good parent would wants their child to grow up and go be independent and have a connection. And I think, and not have that sort of, you're the therapist, right? I mean, to calling your mom. Well, I call my mom every day, but I'm a Greek boy, so. But like that connection that's unhealthy, an unhealthy relationship with that. So what it does is it disempowers someone. Like, I need to go to the mother. I need to go to the grandfather, which some people are calling a boga. I don't know where the heck that came from. It's certainly not traditional. But like, I know where it came from. It came from a desire to have a good grandfather, right? The idea that somehow that the psychedelics are the thing doing it is problematic. I love what you all talked about yesterday, because it's this thing. For me, it's this thing. I don't know about what it is for you all, if you can identify it or not, but it's this thing that's reflected in all of us. And it's disempowering to just lay it over to this sort of psychedelic exceptionalism. Drives me nuts. We're talking about inside sports here, I guess, a little bit, where people are saying, well, those cave paintings had to come from psychedelics. Have you seen what human beings have done totally sober? I mean, the idea that we're going to turn it over. So I think that's problematic. I've had the opportunity working with people with ketamine, where who have come through sort of a traditional, or maybe an ayahuasca or an iboga or a psilocybin traditional path, and they start to talk about the ketamine. The ketamine gave me, it gives me a great opportunity to stop and say, is this thing that's manufactured in a laboratory giving you this, or is it this beautiful human thing that's interacting with that, perhaps, and interacting with the space? Is that the thing? And that is the thing, as far as I can see or feel.
I mean, we're just about the same age. We were raised at a time where public intellectuals were talking about this. They were talking about the couple concerns we take for granted now. They were worried about this thing called conformity, right? And they were also worried about what they called alienation. And what they meant was this experience where I no longer feel my own power to work my life. And that power has been handed to something else. And that's something else they called idolization. And so we're kind of almost knee-jerk in response to any time we see the power of a person being placed on something else. It always feels a little dangerous, right? Because we're trying to kind of return that to here. That doesn't, fetishism and idols can help us get there, but the minute we place our power in them, we become alienated. We're losing this source within us,
It's interesting. I love that you're saying that, and I also kind of see a tension, I guess, I think about my own experiences with having done quite a few ceremonies, and there's often a sense of being very decentered, like being uncentering the human, like coming in, feeling like I'm now in a relationship with something much bigger, a much larger world, like kind of animistic dimensions to it. And I can relate to some of those indigenous contexts in a big way. Like I feel closer to trees, and I feel spirits, and all those things are happening for me in my experience, and it feels wonderful to get out of my head, to sometimes to give my power away and to surrender to these larger, to not psychologize all the things that are happening as, oh, this is me and my trauma, this is my inner process, but actually these are larger animistic forces that I'm just opening up to, that I hadn't seen before, that I'd been locked down from, and now I'm feeling reconnected to it. So, I mean, that's part of the big story that you do hear some people talk about more on the shamanic piece around it. How do you think about that? About the connecting to, I mean, it's in some ways it's what you're saying. It's feeling like in relationship with things, feeling a sparkly sense of play and relationship with the whole world. Maybe that's just another way of saying the same thing. Yeah,
I mean, I think we can get in states of creating a concrete idolization of our own ego, and we can be in a state of recognizing our own capacity to connect. And I guess that's what I mean by that power, is that it's always connecting, right? You can't feel like a human without being connected to the world around you, right?
So true.
But it still emanates from my ability to connect.
Yes,
So,
no question.
so another word for what I think we're looking for is relatedness.
Yeah.
Not oneness necessarily,
Yeah.
but relatedness. I'm related to the world around me, and I'm having this relationship
Yeah.
with it. We also think of that as dialogue. I'm in dialogue with the world.
Yeah.
You know?
And that is something that then you could have after, because it's true, was once the medicine comes out of your system, then you're no longer feeling that sparkly relationality with the tree in the same way you were, but you have an openness to be in a relationship with the world that you're speaking to, and that is the thing. That's the kind of sober, centered, available part of the practice that can stay with you.
Right. One of the things that there's a third of every population throughout modernity that has this powerful attraction to actually giving up that power and becoming just a homogeneic one.
Yeah.
The psychedelic community actually has that element in it.
Oh, big time. Big
That
time.
third is called the authoritarian third.
That's interesting.
Right? So we have to get to this place of our own connectedness to the world to avoid that sense of I just want to be part of one mashed potato of existence, right?
The mashed potato of existence.
Yeah.
I also don't want to in any way, I mean, I really appreciate what you just sort of articulated, because all that's real for me. I don't think it's fetishized, the animistic forces. It's up to each individual to find that, but it's very real to me. So I think it's a little bit different in a relationship to it. And you said practice, and I think that's important. This doesn't have to be a practice, but it could be a practice.
Yeah.
And and some people are one and done. Some people are one and done like this. Some people are one and done like I got it. And some people need to go back. And that practice is sort of accumulative. And I think that sometimes what happens with folks is they have that experience where the trees are alive. They see it. And in the Bwiti, they say, don't believe anything you don't see, but that includes Andri Boga. And so I believe a lot of stuff. But they see it and then they go back to the world. And the only thing I can compare it to, again, going back to art, this has sort of come in the last year or so, is that if you can think about a relationship or a moment of contact with a particular artist. For me, it's Vermeer and the first time I saw Iggy Pop. Okay? Both those things transformed me. I couldn't believe the light. I was in Holland after Iboga, and it was just blowing me away. And the Iggy show was when I was 14. Changed me forever. But I'm the same schmuck, right? Right? So are those interactions valuable? Yes, but it's accumulative. And it became a practice that involved art as part of my healing. And so I think you can sort of, I hope that illustrates in some way. This is a sort of a building and an exploration, as opposed to 3 sessions with MDMA and you're cured from the trauma of war. Unfortunately and fortunately, we're far more complex, far more poetic, far more nuanced, and far more beautiful than that.
Beautiful. That was really amazing what you said. Should we open it up? Because how's our time?
It's 10 to 8. Let's see, how many questions, do we have any questions out here? Okay, well, let's take one. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you think.
So I think, thank you. Thank you guys.
Oh, wait, should we get a
mic?
mic?
Thank you guys. Thank you for last night and thank you for tonight. And I became really curious with mushrooms after listening to a guy at the Nantucket Project back in 2017 talk about palliative care and mushroom work. And he was talking about how we don't die well in America. And so he continued on to talk about using mushrooms with people in end of life. And a lot of people who were going through some cancer treatments were talking about, through their mushroom treatment, medicine, drug, whatnot, that they started to see this fear as a black lump in their body, and they didn't want to be eaten alive, right? So as you guys are seeing the continuation of mushroom medicine, drugs coming into those with cancer or those at end of life, what are you guys seeing right now as far as the ceremonial work in the palliative and supportive care?
I think it's one of the most exciting, and first of all, personally, it's the most rewarding, amongst the most rewarding work that I've ever done. Sitting with folks who have either recovered from cancer or in the process of a cancer process, or folks soon before they die. It's an honor to witness, and I think it's can relieve a tremendous amount of suffering. And I also think that the sort of the death doulas, just like the birth doulas, can really inform the work we're doing, because they've struggled with trying to keep that spirit of holding space in a medical setting. So I think we got a lot to learn. That's not quite answering your question, but to me it's some of the most interesting and valuable work, and it's a beautiful way to help someone with the transition.
Thank you.
I don't know a lot. I'm sorry. I'm a nurse. I don't know a lot about it, but we worked with kids at Children's Hospital in Boston at one time. Hold it to my mouth. Oh, sorry. And it did some amazing things for a couple of kids, but then there was a big controversy. This shouldn't be used on children. There's not enough research. We don't understand it enough. But I'm thinking, like, I'm 65 and I have a pretty good life, but maybe I could have a better life, or maybe I could open up some channels. And then my kid's like, no, Mom, you can have a heart attack, you're going to poop your pants, you're going to throw up. This is for young people. You need to microdose. And so then I have a patient that was offering me mushrooms. She started some religion up in Maine, and it's blowing up. And don't take that stuff. But I'm like, so where do you start? Do I go to Peru? Do I go to Soltara, Arrhythmia? Now you can go to Orlando Marriott, and they're doing it in the woods in New Hampshire. So it's big, and it's everywhere, but who do you trust? What do you do? So
does the Marriott have one of those revolving restaurants on the top?
it might. I didn't go.
It's a really good question. What I would do is look for your local psychedelic society. There's definitely one in Boston. I know the people involved with that. Go through social media, try to find a community of folks doing it. So all kinds of medical professionals doing it. And then just trust your bullshit meter. Trust your gut. You're not going to have a heart attack. You're a medical professional. Unless, it's possible, but it wouldn't be a result of, at least with psilocybin. I mean, I always say the only deaths occurred from a ton of it being dropped on someone. Other than that,
well, I was thinking you freak out so much that you cause a heart attack, because some monsters.
I have never heard of any practitioner where that's happened. I've heard stories about that where people just happen to die. I mean, with a good practitioner, whether there's a difference between a therapist and a ceremonialist and a sitter. I'm a ceremonialist, so a sitter's sitting with you, a therapist is talking with you, but a good practitioner would start out slow. Be careful about these folks that are trying to prescribe. You know, as a nurse, that one medicine can react totally different on one individual and another individual. Body size doesn't have anything to do with it often. So just be real. Just if someone's telling you need to kill your ego the first time out, you don't want any part of you dead. I would say, start slow, slowly build up, and with a good practitioner, if you get into a difficult space, they can help you and walk you through it. It might be difficult, but it wouldn't be life-threatening. Yeah.
And I'm
How
not
do
gonna
you
poop
help
my
people?
pants.
Pardon me?
This pooping pants throw up thing is not true.
That's the poopy pants throw up thing. This is interesting. I think we finally
That's
got to the
ayahuasca.
question.
Been there.
That's ayahuasca. Yeah.
More the vomiting part, but I've seen it.
I had someone tell me, I said, I held on, didn't shit my pants, and they said, well, that's where you missed out.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you missed a good purging opportunity there.
With mushrooms, you might purge a little bit, but it won't be bowel related, but it's actually pretty, it's maybe 10% of the people throw up on that. Yeah. But it's the least of your problems with ayahuasca.
So how do you work with people when they do get stuck, when they're freaking out, or what do you guys do?
No. Okay. Just having done it for 20 years, first of all, be a stable force.
Yeah.
Have a relationship of somewhat before you go into that room, which is going to be a problem when it scales up to the point of hospitals. I mean, God bless nurses, because this is much of the work is being that person in the room, but develop that relationship, and you can work with breath, with touch. There's a way to reassure. How do you do it in a manual? best practices will tell you how. Best practices can often be dangerous. It's a lived experience, but the main thing is to be a stable presence.
Yeah.
A stable, loving, affirming presence, and know that it's not going to last all that long. With Iboga, it's a whole different thing. I've had people go out for a week, become different people and all kinds of stuff like that, but that's about an hour podcast if I go into that.
I love these practical questions. We keep them coming and like nuts and bolts stuff around. Yeah.
Quick question, just jumping on this psilocybin trail. We talked about medicines working for persons that are passing. What about elderly persons with Alzheimer's or dementia, and any work that you've noticed that can help with, creating any kind of healing or safety or peace around those types of medical conditions?
I know people are looking into that. I can't speak to it directly. I think microdosing, for me to talk about it would be, but there is something. If you look around for folks, sort of Google for folks who have done work with microdosing, low threshold. But I can't really speak to that with any sort of confidence. I had my father died from dementia, and I was. Anyway, a personal story, I was going to suggest it to my family, but often that's a hard conversation. So I really don't have an answer for that, but people are looking for it, yeah.
Dimitri, just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the setting of intent before you go in. You generally have people meet with do a teleconference with a therapist, and you talk to them beforehand. And I thought that was really powerful. And going into the ceremony that I did with you, and how that set it apart from just going out with friends, like going backpacking and eating acid in the woods.
I totally endorse that. You want to talk a little bit about it?
About intention setting?
Yeah.
Well, when we talk about a container, you're talking about this other word, holding a person, which is I'm here with you in my mind, and I'm witnessing you from the moment we meet to the moment you leave. And part of that is the conversation about why are you here? And that this becomes a shared experience for us, that I'm now holding you in my head and I'm walking you through this experience of why you're here. Mostly what happens in psychedelic experiences is you go in with an intention and it completely alters to something else. And you actually kind of laugh at the intention. You're kind of like, that it got me here, but it's not the thing that I'm actually going to reflect on. It kind of got me to the room. And so that is partly why we hold intentions kind of lightly. We want to get to something a little deeper through this process than just somebody saying, I'm here because I want self-love. We want to get to, how does that play out in your life? And part of our work is something Dimitri sort of expressed earlier, is we're interested in people developing relationships with their suffering and relationships with their experiences. And so we're less interested in that intention sort of defining them than something like, well, where does it rest for you? What's your relationship with it? And then how do we bring that into the ceremony?
Yeah. I don't know what I was going to say. It was pretty good what you just said. It's really fucking good, dude.
You could say nothing if you want.
No, that's impossible. Yeah, I think that what Ross was saying about really being witnessed, and I think, that's maybe what you were describing there. I hope that's what you were describing, is a witnessing, and so to hold the intention is. I like to look at it as the fuel and not the destination. But that witnessing is a powerful part of any healing process, I think, is just being able to be really seen and heard, and not just as a collection of diagnoses or stories. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In Cardea, we have this idea we call radical hospitality, and that's being a good host, yeah, but it's also part of that is really trying to know someone better, more deeper, and so that we can honor what we call the sacred individuality of the person.
Yeah, and part of radical hospitality is also, like, central to radical hospitality is a constant adjusting to a person's discomfort, right? So in a ceremony, I'm going to speak like I'm a ceremonist, I apologize, but in a ceremony, you do something, but if it's causing discomfort, you're backing off, right? So the whole act is an act of attunement. What do I do? How do I try that? Oh, that works, that doesn't work. That's really different than what we mean by hospitality, just feeling comfortable or just feeling, well-fed. It's about, am I responsive to the person in as accurate a way as possible? And that's also what is the medicine for somebody who's distressed. Yeah. Which is, I'm here listening, and I'm here trying to respond to your experiences, and I'm going to make a series of mistakes and then back off on those mistakes until we find the place where you're rightly held. It's actually very close to massage, right? Massage is this conversation in which you're finding the right level of pain, the right level of challenge in a conversation with someone. It's always in a dialogue.
I'm going to speak like a therapist for a second.
Uh-oh.
And just say, if there's a space of discomfort, we back off. But sometimes, I mean, that's the thing about being in that space, and those therapists in the room will understand that. Sometimes you lean in, but also knowing that you could be making a mistake. So it's sort of the arrogance of a professionalism, whether that's a therapist or a shaman, and saying that I didn't screw that up, and being able to take some risk. And that's all the art of it. That's all the improvisation of it. Thank you. Yeah.
And I think that's a slight answer to somebody who was asking about where do I find a good person. I think not going to a place where a person went for a 6-week training on how to be a space holder is probably to start. Go to someone where people really have a lot of experience on how to hold people through things, because it's an art form. It really is. It's an improvisational art form to be able to walk somebody through an experience where they feel witnessed and held by you in a compassionate way.
It's amazing you do this for people. It's amazing you do this for people.
It's amazing to do it. Yeah.
I'm going to make this question even just super basic. Let's say, I think everybody in this room and everybody in the room last night, there's like this interest. There's this interest peaked. You've read some articles. This sounds interesting. Like our resident nurse here said, my life's pretty good, but maybe it could be better. There's that feeling, right? And you're kind of looking for something that pushes you, just catalyzes. Like, where is it? Meditation for me? Do I try psychedelics? Like, do I just need to go to Bali and eat, pray, love? Like, for you, and obviously we're not saying like do psychedelics, it's the best. But who paint a picture of like who's a person that might be ready for this? Like, what is happening in your life, or what are your feelings? What does it look like when someone comes to you and you're like, yeah, actually, you might like this?
I mean, my answer is like your answer last night, the person that does it. I mean, I do worry. Like, we live in this culture where everybody's being told, like, you're not doing the thing that will get you to that place. Yeah. And so everybody's now feeling like, I'm losing out if I don't do psychedelics. When there's plenty of ways to experience play and connectedness and love and compassion, all of those things. But I think that the person that goes. I think it does seem to help with suffering around repetitiveness and habit. Yeah. So I do think it has it opens people up to novelty instead of habit. I do think it does have that quality to it. Yeah.
And actually I think, 65.
It's a great age for it.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Over 50. Yeah. And not to put any pressure on you, but, have done service and are just looking for something more. I mean, of course, to relieve one's suffering, but also to see what to explore and to play. There's plenty of folks it's not for. And there's plenty of experiences of suffering that it's a bad idea depending on where they are in their healing process, particularly around, this blanket idea of trauma. There's so many kinds of trauma. So there's early childhood sexual trauma. I've had that in my life, but I was sort of a formed person, and I dealt with it even with my heroin use. But depending on those types of trauma, I don't think it's a good idea unless someone has spent a lot of time working on it. I think this idea that we just open up the trauma and go in there is it could be a dangerous thing. But for folks who are sort of along on that journey and are in a healing process, and that it could be amazing. But I think just for exploration, it's wonderful. You know, it can be wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. The therapy professions have spent years saying that you have to build a strong enough person to deal with early childhood trauma. Yeah. You have to have a strong enough sense of your own self-efficacy and your own pride before you deal with it. And there's elements within the psychedelic community that's just ignoring that, just saying, come and deal with your trauma. And they're taking PTSD from wartime and acting like it's the same event as the profound event of what happens to your personality when the people you love are abusing you. And they're saying that the same thing. It's a trauma-creating narrative and a trauma-creating system to be doing that. Yeah.
So I am a practicing psychiatrist, psychopharmacologist, and to answer your question, who does this? Who I refer patients constantly who have been coming to me for decades and tried 20 different meds. And, you know, they may not be morbidly depressed, but they say, I lack a capacity for joy, or as much joy as I feel I could be experiencing. Just a muted sense of pleasure and joy. So they may not fit the criteria for major depressive disorder, severe, whatever. But that muted sense of joy, and I treat a lot of people around, you know, my age, and a lot of people as their kids are gone or whatever, just like, what's next? And those are the folks who I think do just really well. They're one type of referral. There's a million people that can benefit, but that's one specific type of person who I think really benefits.
Oh, I'm one of those people.
You're one of those people.
Muted sense of joy?
Need some joy?
Yeah, totally.
I really appreciate that, because that is a huge part of my practice and has been. And it also brings up one of the challenges is folks, you know, a lot of these medicines you cannot, are counter, what do you call it? You can tell my technical skills are right up there, Doc.
Well, they blunt emotions.
Yeah, they blunt it, or they're dangerous to mix, or you don't have a reaction. And so there's this conversation of when to come off the meds, how to come off the meds, which is ketamine is one of the drugs that you don't have to, for most drugs. Yes. And I think ketamine is wonderful for that. It's really sort of low threshold. But another concern is folks just willy-nilly sort of coming off their meds that was an ally without a great psychopharmacologist to work with and walk them through it. Right. So yeah, but that's such a huge part of my private practice and my formerly underground practice, and then the sort of above practice that we're doing in Jamaica and in Tribeca. Yeah.
Nice. I'm an investigator for 3 different psychedelic trials for FDA approvals. Right. And so those are just in the kind of rudimentary phases. But the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, I think, is something that's real time. You know, that's live. We can do that right now.
Yep.
It's off-label, not FDA approved.
Right.
I think completely safe as any pharmaceutical I write a script for.
Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing remarkable experiences with ketamine, doing it in sort of this setting, and also with CAP, with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. But you know, so for sort of a low threshold, your kids won't freak out type of thing. Yeah, you know, ketamine can be really effective, and you can get a pretty deep experience. And I believe, I mean, what is a psychedelic, right? Sort of technically, I believe you could trip. And so we bring in these elements that we've talked about, elements of play, sound, and if you're in New York and want to come by, our space is more of an art space than it is a clinic.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's real serious concerns about ketamine too. It's a lot of ketamine has been delivered in sort of really the same business model as Botox, which is you don't need you use the technology as the cure. There's not a real strong human element to it. And so you pop into the ketamine clinic, you put something in your arm, and then you leave 2 hours later, and you may meet with some junior staff member who claims to help you integrate. And that's like a really good example of what might happen when psychedelics really enter the medical system. It's just this because it's the cheapest way to deliver it. It's basically here. It's like TMS machines too. All this stuff that people are now using in their practices that supposedly change people. And the one thing that we're removing is labor. And the fact is that it's the human element that's always pulling people through this. And the idea that we have these special treatment called ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, it's kind of beautiful stuff, but it's also like, good psychotherapy does really well with ketamine. We don't necessarily are a better psychotherapist because you went to a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy training than somebody with years in psychotherapy who's using ketamine. So it's itself becoming this commodity, this idea of this training stuff, this best practice stuff is sort of classic to what's going on in our culture right now.
Cool. I think we probably have time for like one more question. I'm gonna pass them. Oh, you have a mic. Good.
Can you go into more in detail, like your experience with iboga or any other plant medicine that you find, as a human experience, like very, deep, or any other things like, for somebody who's concerned, like, hey, 3 days of a trip, I'm not so sure, but I want to experience like a deep, like. So iboga and anything else that you think that could be,
That would. I'm sorry. That would be.
That is a human experience. Like you have to experience that as a human being. It's like there's yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Iboga is a very high threshold medicine. My first experience was in sort of a what's the word I'm looking for? Secular. I was in a house outside of Amsterdam with Sarah Glatt, who had 6 kids, and there was a windmill in the back, and I went from the streets of Detroit to this windmill, but it took several days, and this would be another hour for me to go into it, but I would just say that my experience with it was that because I was going in to work on to end my habit, the first thing I noticed was I didn't have a craving, which doesn't happen with everyone, but would happen with me. I didn't have a craving for heroin, which is the first time in 20 years I didn't have it. And then I was able to sort of go in and have a life review. And it took days. I tried to count the sun-ups and sundowns, but I lost control. I lost the count because I lost control of a lot of stuff. But like I lost the ups and downs. So it turned out it was a little over 3 days. But I had a review, a life review, where I saw it's sort of like the ledger was kind of laid out in front of me. What was mine, which is very similar to 12 steps sort of ledger when done right. What was mine, what was someone else's, and what was God's. And my common law wife had died pregnant from heroin, and I was. If I had even come back and used heroin right after that, the fact that I knew that wasn't mine, that was something else outside of myself. And then also incredible experience with my ancestral experiences with my people, where there was a matriarch that I experienced that was somehow deep in the ground of the Peloponnese. And the words "dead so long, the earth's gone through you," sort of repeated over and over and over and over, like maybe for hours, until it just became everything, that I become dirt. And then experiences with the future, things that, something like, not this particular event, but that I would be holding a microphone talking about this was there, very specifically. This is really people that I would meet soon, particularly in Gabon, and very specifically and oddly that I would be on This American Life. So I don't know. It happened. I recorded a driveway moment, but they didn't use it.
Classic iboga experience.
Classic. Yeah, that's sort of atypical.
But I'm just curious why you're asking. What?
His experience.
Yeah.
Concern that 3 days ago, should I? Because I want to experience, let's say, like I don't have a heroin problem going in. Like your thoughts about somebody who just wants to experience something. But concerned like 3 days.
You're iboga. You don't.
I want to go into 3 days of trip.
Yeah, iboga is the highest threshold. You don't have to do that. Ketamine can give you a very powerful experience in 2 hours. Mushrooms, like a 4-hour experience, and maybe you're back at work. I take a couple of days off, as much as time afterwards. So Iboga is sort of like to go right to that. And by the way, it's not used for heroin and Gabon. It's used for many other things, and also a sort of an exploration into spirit and connection. So if you're interested, I know a guy. No, if you're interested. Well, for Iboga, you could go to Costa Rica. For ibogaine, the hydrochloride, you go to Mexico. But it is, if that's where you want to go first, go for it. But it's pretty high threshold, and you could have similar experiences, similar life enriching experiences outside of Iboga. So it could become a practice. It could become, you let your curiosity sort of take you.
How many times have you done it?
Iboga, I've done what they call a flood dose 3 times. I've done various levels, different. At one point, I was asked, sort of in my initiation, to take a pretty large amount for 90 days, which I wouldn't recommend. But that was an initiatory process, and smaller doses when I'm holding space with Iboga, and when I was holding space sort of on a regular basis. I don't take it that much anymore, but like small doses of Iboga is delightful. The problem is, once you get over the small and it gets a little large, then you're like, oh shit, like here we go. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to, before we go, and the guys will be out in the lobby, so please feel free to grab one of their pamphlets. They are called Cardea, and then ask some more questions. But maybe you could just, before we go, how can people work with you, find out about what you do, or maybe somebody in their area, kind of just give us the send-off. Let's see where.
Well, we have a ketamine space in New York City that's kind of remarkable. It's this sort of artistic space where we do something pretty in depth compared to ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. We really do kind of space holding through ketamine experiences, and then we regularly do trips out of the country for psilocybin journeys. And we usually do three trips during those. Right now we do that in Jamaica, but we're looking at other places to do that. And then people can find us on Cardea.net.
Cardea.net.
I should also add that we are very concerned about accessibility to these medicines, so we just started our scholarship program where we're working with sort of frontline workers who work with overdose prevention and that sort of thing. And we are about to, within the next couple months, open a space at the Harm Reduction Center, the safe injection site in Harlem, where we'd have a psychedelic space offering the same services for poor and working people.
Oh, look, time's up. I don't actually know the prices, do you? The ketamine space is like the average prices. It's, I don't know what it is. I'm so sorry. You can look it up. Yeah. The Jamaica trips are between about 5,800 and 8,500 is basically kind of the range for that.
And I think the ketamine, I don't know either. It's like 22 to I don't know.
We're really good business.
The business model's not great. Just we take a lot of time with people, and anyway.
Yeah.
Well, Dimitri and Ross, it was good to hang out with you.
Good to hang out with you and all of you.
Yeah,
and all of you. Thank you for your
Susan
interest.
and John and Cecilia for being such great hosts. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. Awesome.